Wow, what an episode. And friends, welcome back to the Bankrupt Hippo YouTube channel. This is going to be a spoiler session for Loki episode 6. So if you haven't seen season 1 episode 6 of Loki, go ahead, watch it, come back, watch this video. Otherwise, if you don't care about spoilers or you've already seen the episode, welcome to the party. If I had to describe this episode in just a few words, I would say, holy shitballs. This episode was pretty great, and I was not expecting to get this much payoff for the end of the season. We got a lot of character payoff in terms of Loki himself completing his entire arc, I guess you could say, from episode 1 all the way to now. We got the development of his and Sylvie's relationship, and we also got a peek of, or we actually know now, who was behind the TVA, why they did it, and who exactly they are. So overall, I thought the episode was great. Aside from a little bit of meandering towards the first half, I think it made for a really great episode and a nice end to season 1, because as it turns out, in the post-credit scene, we're getting a second season, which totally shocked me. I thought for sure this was just going to lead into another Marvel title. I didn't think Loki would get another season beyond this, but it seems to be the case that this and Falcon and Winter Soldier are going to be getting additional seasons for each. So really pumped. I'm always cool to see other Marvel titles come into fruition. Start off with the completion of Loki's development as a character, going from that narcissistic, power-hungry character who is really selfish to a selfless person who is willing to care for others and also think about the greater context of his actions. And it was really satisfying to see, basically to start off the episode, him and Sylvie get to the Citadel beyond the end of time, beyond the void, and they run into Miss Minutes, who basically gives them a message from who behind the TVA is. The message is basically, if you turn around now, you can go back into the timeline and live the ideal lives that you wanted to. So Loki, you could go ahead and you could rule New York City, you could rule the entire universe, you could defeat Thanos if you wanted to. Sylvie, you can go back to where you came from and you could leave, or you could live out the life that you always dreamed of. And Loki, when he's faced with this decision to get all the ultimate power that he would have craved all the way back in episode 1, he declines it because he knows that there's a greater good, thus completing his arc as a character, his growth, his maturity. That's been going to fruition all the way from the beginning of the season. So kind of continuing on, this is where the episode starts to meander a little bit, because the build up to finding out the man behind the current of the TVA takes a little while. I'll just give it to you straight. It's Kang. They call him He Who Remains. That's who the TVA refers him to. And it's played by Jonathan Majors, and I believe that Marvel's done a good job of keeping this under wraps, because even Jonathan Majors is like, I'm not involved. Turns out it was a lie. He appears in this, and I gotta give it to him. He really crushes it in this episode. His performance, and also Tom Hiddleston's performance, was, I thought, absolutely excellent. They just really brought it, and it's something I really enjoyed watching. It's Loki, Sylvie, and Kang. I'll just call him Kang for the rest of the spoiler talk. They all get to talking about essentially the origins of the TVA, why the TVA came to be, why he's there, how he created the TVA. All those questions are answered, and I had my jaw hitting the floor basically the entire time. Basically, what he reveals is that he, in the year 3000 something, I can't remember, started to study multiverses, and he basically discovered that there's an infinite number of them, and it turns out that at the same time he was studying multiverses, all of his variants in the other universes were doing the same thing. So after a while, they discovered a way to communicate, interact with each other, hence TimPads being created, and then they all will start to work together in harmony in these multiverses. However, not every variation of himself was so pleasant. Some of these variants looked at this as a way to start to rule other timelines and do additional conquest. What he decided to do was he decided to snuff them all out, condense everything just into one timeline, and just call it a day to keep everybody from trying to rule each other. It's kind of strange, because in doing so, he kind of rules over every timeline in that respect, so take that for what you will. Once he got scrounged down into one singular timeline, he created the TVA to maintain that timeline, so that, as they put it in the first episode, utter chaos wouldn't ensue and everybody would stop trying to rule each other. Essentially, by keeping one timeline straight, it keeps everything a lot more organized, a lot less chaotic. That was essentially his motivation. At the end of this conversation, he basically gives Loki and Sylvie an ultimatum. He's like, all right, well, now that we're here, you have two options. One, you can kill me, in which that will result in all of the variations in the universe occurring and then thus creating a giant multiverse once more. The whole cycle will just kind of repeat again until eventually he will be back into his position. He will be back at the Citadel, controlling one central timeline, almost like a reincarnation. Option 2 is that Loki and Sylvie can spare his life and they can just take over the TVA to do with what they please. The way he put it was that he was tired and that he's lived millions and millions of years, which makes sense because he controls all of time and literally writes all of time. So Loki and Sylvie have a decision to make, and wouldn't you know it, Loki and Sylvie are on each side of this coin. Loki, like I said earlier, he now understands his actions have consequences for the larger world, while Sylvie is still kind of bent on revenge. So Loki is on the side of they should just take over for Kang because they can use their knowledge to maybe transform the TVA into something for good. On the other hand, Sylvie is just kind of a little apprehensive because maybe she thinks that Loki is just saying that because he wants the throne, he wants the power, and she still wants her revenge. Her vengeance is still on her mind. And I guess that kind of reveals her arc a little bit more because her entire life has been sort of ruined by Kang. She doesn't have that free will, and she's still really, really upset by that. And Loki, he acknowledges that, but he says at the end of the day, this is bigger than just you and me, that we're talking about a whole entire universe of people hanging in the balance with our decision. We should really think about it. So then they are at odds, they have this little fight, and this is where, like I said, this is where Tom Hiddleston really brings it in the scene because Sylvie has her scythe to his neck. And he's like, Sylvie, please, I don't want to hurt you. You can hurt me if you want, but I just want to be with you, and that's all that matters. They have their moment, they smooch a little bit, and it kind of completes the arc of the relationship and how they feel about each other, which is they are, I would say, in love. Sylvie uses this opportunity to use the TemPad, toss Loki into it, and send him back to the TVA, while she executes her side of the story, takes the scythe right into Kang's chest, and now creates this entire new multiverse. So it was a really big holy shit moment for me. I can't believe Sylvie actually went through with it, and she did it with pleasure too. She took that thing and just went right into his chest. Hank says really something interesting right before she does it. He goes, I'll see you around, or something to that degree, and it makes sense, right? Because he said eventually he's going to be back into this position again. It's like a whole reincarnation, because by creating this multiverse of timelines, eventually he's going to run into his own version again, and thus the cycle will repeat. It's a little convoluted in that respect, and I think it might take a couple of watches of this episode to really grasp it, but just look at it this way. By Sylvie's actions, it's essentially creating this giant multiverse leading into the other Marvel titles, and thus creating a whole slew of mess variants and etc. So everything's just gone chaotic. Now, what really, really blew my mind at the end of this episode is we cut now to Loki after Sylvie essentially stabs Kang in the chest. And Loki, he knows what's happening, he knows what Sylvie's done, so he runs to find Mobius and B-15 to explain what is going on, and they can see through their TemPads that all these different variants are starting to branch, all the timeline is branching, so they're calling out all the troops and everything. Loki runs, he starts yelling to Mobius and B-15 like, hey, like, you know, all these variants have been created, we can't stop them, and they both say, who are you? You're an analyst. What area are you from? And it begs to us as the audience. It's like, holy shit, by Sylvie killing Kang in that moment and creating all these different timelines, she sent Loki to another timeline in which he hasn't met Mobius and B-15, and also in which Kang is the timekeeper and the only timekeeper. He doesn't have those puppets like he did in the timeline that we've seen. So it's essentially starting the process over again, and it's like, oh my god, it was just so mind-blowing to see Mobius and B-15 not recognize Loki at all. It was just, it was crazy weird. So the episode sort of ends there overall. I know I didn't really touch too much on the rest of the TVA, like for example Mobius and Ravonna, because honestly between them not really too much happens in this episode. Mobius confronts Ravonna, and Ravonna essentially leaves to find what she calls free will, but now that Sylvie's reset a whole bunch of different timelines, that kind of is rendered moot. So Ravonna's payoff is a little bit not so cathartic in this case. On the other side of that coin, B-15 exposes to all the other TVA agents who Ravonna actually is and what her past was. Turns out she was a high school principal in this case. But like I said, at the end, it doesn't really matter because all these different variations and branches have been happening now. So it only makes a difference in the old timeline, but now there's a whole bunch of them. So it gets really, really confusing overall. So like I said, there are a ton of implications for what Sylvie has done, and I'm really curious to see how it's going to end up playing out, especially in future Marvel titles and in season 2 of Loki. I'm also really curious to see now what will happen with Loki and Sylvie, because obviously they care for each other a lot, and will they ever get their moment again, or is the timeline going to be too scrambled for them to find each other once more? Who knows? The one thing I'm really there's a couple of weaknesses I think this episode has that I'm really bummed out about. First, we don't see Mobius get on a jet ski. I was really hoping for that. And also, we don't really understand why Kang created the 3 artificial robot timekeepers to run the TVA in the first place. That's not really elaborated on, and it doesn't really make a whole ton of sense in my mind, especially at the end of the episode when Loki is in that new timeline and it's just Kang's statue and that's it. The TVA knows exactly who Kang is and he runs the show and why. Well, I guess I can't say that definitively. I'm sure they don't know why he runs the show, but they just know that he runs the show. So it's like, why did he need the 3 timekeepers, the fake timekeepers in the first place? Was it to conceal who all the TVA agents were, their past lives? That's not really clear, and I wish they would have just explained that a little bit more. Other than that, I think they did a really great job explaining what Kang's purpose was, why he did what he does, and also the implications of Sylvie's actions, and also wrapping up Loki's character arc for just this season and seeing his growth. And overall, on the series, or I should say on the season, I think this was a good season. Of course, it had its ups and downs. I'd say the best episode was probably the first one. The second, fourth, and last episode are all, I'd say, good or great, and then the third and fifth episode are probably the weakest. I'll say the third episode was probably the weakest overall. It was really cool to see Loki go from this character who was very narcissistic, very selfish, to this person who is able to look at his consequences and the larger implications of them. So really fun to watch, and really cool to see him and Sylvie get through their journey together as well. And also Mobius was really charming throughout this season. I hope he's in season 2, because that would make it so much better. Owen Wilson absolutely crushed. I think that about does it for my thoughts on this episode and the season overall. Like I said, it's really great, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in future Marvel titles. And mad props to Jonathan Majors and Tom Hiddleston for bringing it in this last episode, because their performances, they just, oh man, it got me right in the chest. So my friends, what did you make of Loki episode 6, or what did you make of the entire season? Whatever you think, you know where the comment section is, let me know. All right, my friends, so thanks so much again for joining me today. This has been the Bankrupt Hippo YouTube channel. Like, comment, and subscribe for more fun content. I've been Bryson. Until the very next video, have a great day.